Good morning to you, Kit.
Good morning, Carole.
Good to have you with us. Let me talk first of all about Ukraine. The Prime Minister had that meeting with President Zelensky in Kyiv yesterday, and he's announced 120 armoured vehicles and anti-ship missile systems, which the UK is providing. Do you think the rest of NATO is being too cautious or too mean?
Well, obviously, Carole, that's a matter for them. We are trying to pull every sinew we can and strain every muscle that we can to assist the Ukrainians with as much money and armament as we can within the bounds of our natural caution around interaction of NATO and the Russian Federation. So, as you say, $100 million worth of stuff going into soon. Armored vehicles, anti-ship missiles. Don't forget also the financial assistance. We added $500 million to the loan guarantee through the World Bank, on top of the initial $500 million that we gave a few weeks ago to assist Ukraine with its economic sustenance, if you like. And obviously, we lifted tariffs on most Ukrainian imports. Okay. We are doing everything we possibly can to try and assist them as they push back the Russian forces. I have to say, successfully in some parts of the country. We understand.
But we know that the Ukrainians want more weapons, don't they? We've had an advisor to President Zelensky this morning saying we need more weapons. Joe Biden blocked the plan to send MiG jets into Ukraine. Tobias Ellwood, who chairs the Defence Select Committee, says NATO's being too timid.
Well, as the Prime Minister said in the past, we are being very careful to make sure that we provide as much defensive weaponry as we possibly can, with some success. You will have seen the footage and the stories about British provided or supplied armaments that are helping in the defense of Kyiv and other cities in Ukraine. And we need to bear in mind if you like, the likelihood of miscalculation on either side here, and be cautious while being enthusiastic in our assistance towards the Ukrainians. We are in constant conversation with them about what they need. The Prime Minister was able to do that in person yesterday, as you saw, quite remarkable footage of him walking around Kyiv with President Zelensky. And we will do what we can. We are now, for example, for the first time, providing these anti-ship missiles, which will help Ukraine secure their access to the sea, so they can both preserve the cities there, but also export those goods they need to provide them with the economic sustenance that they need as well. We'll continue to talk to them about what they need and take decisions accordingly.
But we know that what they want, for example, is tanks, and a great deal of them, and more help in trying to tackle Russian jets and so on. If you have a situation where a sovereign country is invaded and that nation needs to form a counter-offensive to push Russian troops out of its own country, isn't this distinction between offensive and defensive weapons obsolete?
Well, no, and we, as I say, we've been very clear that the munitions that we're supplying are for defensive purposes. And indeed, it's been successful thus far. I mean, as you may know, we understand Russian troops have withdrawn from the north of Ukraine back into Belarus. And whether they're massing for an assault, as we've heard earlier this morning, into the east, let's see. But we will do our best to reinforce the Ukrainian defenses as much as we possibly can. As I say, we took another big step yesterday in order to do that, and the Prime Minister was able to discuss directly with President Zelensky what more he may need. You know, we've certainly been in the lead, right, on this stuff. We've pushed and pushed and pushed our allies and partners to supply as much as we possibly can into Ukraine. We were told at the start of this conflict, if you remember, Carole, that this was going to be a bulldozer. The Russians would bulldoze their way through Ukraine in a matter of days. Well, that hasn't happened, and that's down to the courage and the fortitude of the Ukrainian people, assisted by the weaponry that Britain and partners have supplied.
But our record when it comes to welcoming those who are fleeing this appalling onslaught is much less good, isn't it? We've got the latest figures saying that only 1,200 refugees have arrived in the UK under the Homes for Ukraine scheme. That's a tenth of the 12,500 visas which have actually been granted, but people still can't actually get here. Do you think the Home Secretary, Priti Patel, was right to apologise for this?
Yes, obviously we recognise the frustration around some of the slow bureaucracy, and we would like it to be faster. We are accelerating. Between the two routes in, we've now had just under 80,000 applications. We've issued just over 40,000 visas. We are processing them. I think we did 1,000 yesterday. We're accelerating as fast as we can. Hundreds of people now drawn from across Whitehall working on this 7 days a week to get through as much as we possibly can, as fast as we can. It's worth though saying, Carole, that while you are right that we've issued...
But we keep hearing, Kit, I know you're saying that you're speeding this up, but we have had several guests on Times Radio during the week, including people, a woman whose husband drove herself to rescue a woman, her mother, her children, to bring them to the UK. And because of delays and hold-ups with the visas, they're still stuck and are having to pay for a hotel in the Netherlands because they can't sort out the bureaucracy. The bureaucracy on this has been appalling, hasn't it?
Well, it hasn't been the best, I would admit, although we have gone some way to streamline it since, and that is speeding things up. Richard Harrington, the minister concerned, has an aspiration to get these things turned around in 48 hours. We are accelerating as we go. As I say, 1,000 yesterday. We'll be doing more a day by the end of the week. Hundreds of people now working on this. Just on your point about the number of people who've been issued with a visa who've yet to come to the UK, we do understand that for quite a lot of people, the holding of a UK visa is a kind of last resort. They are hoping upon hope that they can return to their homes quite naturally, and therefore possibly staying in Poland and elsewhere to wait to see what happens. We will be there for them. There is no limit to the two schemes that we put in place. As I say, just under 80,000 applications now with more to come. We need to accelerate our processing of those visas, and that's exactly what we're doing at the moment.
Let me ask you then,
as many people as possible.
Let me ask you then about a story in the Times yesterday where they found evidence that some Ukrainian refugees are at risk of exploitation. We had an undercover reporter who posed as a 22-year-old woman, and she was bombarded with inappropriate offers of single men offering that she could share their bed and so on. Are there sufficient safeguards in this scheme?
Well, that's the balance that we're trying to strike. So, as you will know, under the Homes for Ukraine, the sponsorship scheme, there are checks required for those sponsoring for exactly the reasons that you state. Now, this is a balance. We want to make sure that we get through the checks as thoroughly as possible, but as speedily as possible, to make sure that those Ukrainians who come here are as safe as they possibly can be settled in a controlled way, but recognizing that we want to be able to get people out of the region who want to leave the region as fast as we possibly can. Now, this is a tricky balancing act. The checks, we believe, are necessary. We need to make sure we can do them as fast as possible.
Let me ask you then about the Chancellor, Rishi Sunak. Shouldn't he have realised when he became Chancellor that his and his family's tax arrangements were going to come under scrutiny?
Well, you've seen the statements made by the Chancellor and his wife over the last couple of days on this affair. I mean, obviously, his wife is a non-combatant in politics, and we all try very hard to keep our partners and children out of politics as much as we possibly can. However, the circumstances obviously came to light. Ms. Murthy understood that there was a problem, a disconnect, if you like, between a British sense of fair play and her tax arrangements, which arise from the fact that she is a foreign national who's lived a life of international business, and she's now regularized that situation. And I know that people will recognize the steps that have been taken and hopefully move on.
Yes, we've now had Cressida Dick saying that she will pay tax in the UK on all her overseas earnings. Shouldn't she have realised, though, that, as you say, the British sense of fair play expects that the Chancellor, who's making the rules about taxation and so on, that he and his family live by the same sorts of arrangements that most normal people do? We've now got an investigation into the leak. Shouldn't Rishi Sunak and his family come clean about, for example, why on earth he was still the holder of a US green card, which is intended for people who intend to carry on working in the United States when he was a minister? We've now got questions about investment funds that he has. We've got a loan, £4 million that Cressida Murphy apparently made to her UK company. He needs to come clean about all of this, doesn't he?
Well, even the Chancellor and his wife, in the position they're in, are entitled to some privacy around their financial affairs. And there is a question about how, the integrity of our tax system and the privacy of our tax system is maintained that may need to be looked at. But look, I think to be fair, Miss Murthy has put out what I thought was a very dignified statement about the situation that she found herself in. She has lived a life between India, California, and the UK, and her tax arrangements reflected that. She and Rishi worked together and I think met in California, and the green card arrangements reflected that and are a hangover from that. He's issued a statement that he regularized that situation following advice from the US authorities about how he should do that. And there are lots of people that find themselves in those circumstances.
Okay, so do you think there's been a smear campaign against Akshata Murthy?
Well, I don't know whether I'd call it a smear campaign. Obviously, there's been journalistic and public interest in the situation about a story that's arisen. I don't know where from. I gather from the media that it ran in private eye a year or so ago, and nobody picked it up.
So perhaps this is a concerted campaign to undermine the standing of the Chancellor. Do you think that's the case?
I'm not a conspiracy theorist, Carole, in politics generally. As far as I can see, many of these things seem to be random. Whether it was chosen at this particular moment, I couldn't say. As I say, the Chancellor and his wife have issued some dignified statements about the situation they find themselves in, the changes they're going to make to reflect the sense of what the public see as fair play. But I hope that people will reflect on the fact that Rishi Sunak has been an enormous force for good over the last 2 years, has moved heaven and earth to keep the British economy and its people going through a pandemic, is now facing some very difficult decisions around tax and spend, which I don't envy him having to make. And I hope they will now reflect on that and allow him to get on with the job.
Well, apparently he's already considered quitting politics altogether. That shows a bit of a lack of commitment to the job, doesn't it?
Well, that's all conjecture, and I doubt it very much, personally. He was elected at the same time as me, and he's born in Southampton, worked his backside off to get everything that he's got. I doubt very much if that's the case.
Has he assured you that he's not thinking of quitting? Because it would seem to suggest a bit of a lack of backbone after 1 week of bad headlines if he's thinking of getting out altogether.
Look, Rishi Sunak is an honorary Yorkshireman now as a member of Parliament up there, and he knows the Yorkshire saying, tough times don't last, tough people do.
Isn't the fundamental problem with this that it looks bad for your government and for the party? We've had someone who hasn't left their name got in touch on Twitter saying, I don't care how rich other people are. I don't care about Nondom. That's the law. I do care that they hid the fact and were not open and truthful. That's deceit and should not be put up with in our politicians. And this is at a time when many people are really struggling to make ends meet, to pay their bills, to pay those soaring energy bills. And they're seeing the Chancellor and his wife with all kinds of complicated arrangements that are simply well beyond their reach.
Well, look, Carole, I'd be foolish if I told you it was anything other than less than ideal. The country is struggling with a cost of living crisis at the moment. We are seeing fuel prices through the roof because of global issues, but also, frankly, because of some of the choices that we've made around supporting Ukraine. And so the juxtaposition is not ideal. I totally grant that. And I think that's what's behind the statement that Rishi's wife has made and why she's changing the situation. But, they are entitled to privacy around their financial affairs, as we all are. We all, as ministers, have to make declarations through the ministerial code around our financial arrangements and those of our spouses where appropriate. And as I understand it, that's exactly what the Chancellor did.
Just one more question on this then. We've had Sajid Javid saying that he had non-dom status at one stage. Should all cabinet ministers make those sorts of declarations, come clean about that?
Well, Sajid Javid, as I understand it, was a non-dom well before he got elected to Parliament. He had a life before. I know it's hard to believe that some of us had lives before politics, or indeed after, but he did. And I'm not sure it's necessarily right that we should go back through people's financial arrangements many, many years before. I mean, strangely enough, I doubt he was paying tax when he was 14. Is that a matter of outrage? As I say, when people come into public life, they have to have a sense of the impact of their own arrangements on the job they're going to do, but they're also entitled to some privacy around their financial affairs. Now, Rishi and his wife have found themselves in a difficult situation. They've taken, I think, dignified steps to correct that and to satisfy people's natural anxiety about that. And I hope that he'll now be allowed to move on with doing a fantastic job as Chancellor in difficult times.
Okay. Let me ask you about Cressida Dick, the outgoing Met Police Commissioner. She left Scotland Yard on Friday. There was an extraordinary scene with a guard of honour from saluting police officers. She was clapped and cheered. Do you think that was appropriate, given the circumstances in which she was forced out of the job?
Well, Cressida was a very popular leader in the Metropolitan Police. I mean, I've worked with her on and off now for getting on 14 years, and seen the commitment and the dedication she shows to the job, but also in particular her dedication to the Metropolitan Police and the people that work in it. She has been out there in front, taking the bullets for some of the things that have gone wrong in the organisation, as she feels she should. And I suspect that that was a recognition of that. Plus also, frankly, she is someone who has devoted the greater part, if not all her adult life, to the safety of others. And while obviously the last year has seen some dreadful events in the Metropolitan Police, which she has acknowledged, that should not entirely erase some of the many, many investigations and situations she's been in where she has protected people and saved lives.
But she has overseen a scenario where we had not just the Sarah Everard case, but the row over the policing of the protests, the appalling evidence of officers taking selfies with the bodies of murdered sisters. We had the exchanges of some quite outrageously offensive, misogynist text and so on by officers at one London police station. She has said that she believes the politicisation of policing is a threat to trust in the police. It isn't the problem now that those kinds of incidents under her watch have led to the collapse in trust in the police?
So, look, it has been a terrible period, particularly for the Metropolitan Police. As you quite rightly say, we've seen some really dreadful events that have knocked people's confidence in the Met. I mean, there's no point pretending that they haven't. Quite naturally, they have. But the leadership of the Met and Cressida Dick were as horrified as anybody at these revelations. And, you know, it comes at a time when the Met is working hard to get violence down on London streets as well, and needs all the confidence it can from the British public to do that confrontational job. Now, I think Cressida is the first to accept that, and she had been working very hard on some of those issues. Don't forget that she is the first female and openly gay leader of the Metropolitan Police, which in itself is an achievement and a signal about the changes in that organisation. You know, we're putting lots and lots of new, energetic police officers into the Met. We need to get the culture right. There are inquiries underway for them as much as for the public. There are inquiries underway to make sure that we do exactly that.
Kit Malthouse, thanks very much indeed. Katie Balls is with me and has a question for you.
Good morning, Minister. You've mentioned cost of living and how tough that is, and I think you've also discussed how it affects your own energy bills. We're going to be hearing from Yvette Cooper shortly, who is calling for more money to be invested in police hubs and has suggested that the Royal Yacht be scrapped and the money move from there. Does she have a point?
Well, Katie, I think everybody is looking at their energy bills with alarm, although I would not pretend to you that it's, you know, I can't manage. Of course we can. I know there are lots of people in much tougher situations than we are. Look, we need to constantly think about the balance between public spending and taxation and what we do to try and stretch the envelope as much as we possibly can to help people, at the same time making sure that we have an economy that's firing on all cylinders and is relieved of as much of the tax burden as possible. Having said that, we face particular problems at the moment, such as investing in dealing with the backlog in the NHS. That's going to take billions and billions of pounds over the next 2 or 3 years. So, look, it's a difficult equation. I know the Chancellor and others are reviewing it all the time.
Do you think a Royal Yacht, though, could, funded by taxpayer money, could outstep with the national mood right now, though?
I don't know quite where we are on the Royal Yacht situation at the moment. I'm not close to that particular decision. I think it's falling in the MOD budget. Listen, don't forget that the production of a Royal Yacht, whether it goes ahead or not, represents thousands and thousands of jobs in a shipbuilding yard somewhere in the UK. It's economic stimulation as much as it is national prestige.
And just a final question for me, again, on spending. I mean, I know you can't say what was said at Cabinet, but I can say what was reported. And that was that you said at Cabinet that inflation means public spending perhaps needs to be cut. And there was some suggestion that the spending review could be revisited. If we are heading to a period where we're going to have to be tighter on public spending, what do you say to your colleagues who are currently pushing for an increase to the defence budget? Is that really viable in the current situation we find ourselves in?
Well, as I said before, Katie, right, we have to balance the choices we make between the amount of tax we raise, what we spend it on, and the impact that has on our economy. Now, I was a local councillor for 8 years, then at City Hall for 8 years, and now I've been in Parliament for 7 years. And throughout that period, I've always had in the back of my mind that I need to squeeze every piece of value I can out of every pound I ask the public to give me to spend on their behalf. And I would say to my colleagues that they should do exactly the same thing.